Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear us. Maybe we'll give it a couple of minutes to let everyone join, and then we can start the webinar. We will give it another minute, and then we can get started. Thank you. All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Getting Ready for the EU Radio Equipment Directive, Ensuring Cybersecurity Compliance for Market Access. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Kiran Bhagat, and I'm the Commercial Director for Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, and India in Product Certification for BSI. Next slide, please. All right, so what will we cover? So in this webinar, we'll introduce the EU Equipment Directive, what it is, which products need to comply with the new directive, which products are exempt, what you need to achieve to be ready, and the services that BSI offers to ensure EU market access. There will be a Q&A, but we will leave that to the end of the webinar. So please add your questions to the chat and we can pick this up. And we will also distribute a copy of the slides and the recording. You also have an opportunity to ask and give feedback, which will be available immediately after the webinar concludes. So to get us started, we have a free toolkit available to all of you. Right, so feel free to scan the QR code or jump on the link on the website. As I said, the slides will be distributed, so as part of that, you will have the link. But if you've got your phones handy, jump on. You get a RED regulations guide, a FAQ, and a two-page checklist to access market compliance and the next steps. All right, so let's introduce our speakers. We have our two gentlemen here, Carlos Perez Ruiz. Carlos is currently BSI's Global Head of Digital in the product certification business and is leading the digital trust portfolio addressing market access in cybersecurity testing and certification. Carlos has a wealth of experience with over 20 years in the TIC sector and also dynamic experience in technical sales and marketing leader. Carlos holds a MSc in telecommunications and engineering degree, majored in communications and telematics, and also a postgraduate degree in sales and marketing management. Welcome, Carlos, and thank you for joining us early your time from the UK. Joining Carlos will be Mustanir Ali, our IoT certification team manager. Mustanir has a master's degree in electronics and software engineering and has been involved in CE marking and testing for certification and products for over a decade, working with various regulations and directives. He has particular interest in experience in certifications of products and softwares, such as electronic controls, consumer electric products, and medical devices. Again, Mustanir, welcome as well, and thank you for joining us from the UK. Okay, so to kick us off, let's start off with some polls. We would like to understand our audience, so there are a couple of poll questions that we get into, and then from there, I can hand over to Carlos. So starting off, the first question, do you currently manufacture or supply internet-connected radio equipment? The choices are up on the screen, so please feel free to take on one. All right, let's see the outcome. Okay, so 50% say yes, 33% no, and 17% it is in our roadmap. Okay, moving on to the next question. Where do you supply internet-connected radio equipment? Is it Europe only, UK only, Europe and UK, or the rest of the world? Let's see which. Okay, so Carlos, Mustanir, 80% Europe and UK, and 20% rest of the world. And our final question, how familiar are you with the new RED Delegated Act on Cybersecurity requirements? Not at all, a bit familiar, yes, but I will welcome more information, and completely familiar. All right, so mainly no or a bit familiar. So I think that sets the stage for you, Carlos, to take over. So I hand over the mic to you, following that, Mustanir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kiran. Well, good day, everyone. Thank you so much, as Chris said, that attend this webinar that we have prepared carefully for you. So I will be doing an introduction to the Radio Equipment Directive, explaining the different essential requirements, explaining the process to be compliant with. And obviously, the most relevant part would be the latest changes to the Radio Equipment Directive including now cybersecurity. Next slide, please. What is the radio equipment directive? Let's start from the beginning. The European Radio Equipment Directive is a directive active now almost 8 years and establishes a regulatory framework for placing radio equipment in the European market. Basically, all radio equipment with the scope of the directive that are placed in the market of Europe need to be compliant with the requirements of the directive since June 2017. This directive applies to all kind of equipment that emits or receives radio waves for radio determination or communication purposes. So this can include, as you can imagine, many types different of devices, okay? Mobile phone, laptop, smart devices, automotive connected devices, and many more. So the only exception is that the radio equipment directive do not cover the equipment directive used for public security and defense activities or radio equipment used by radio amateurs. Basically, the radio equipment directive has different essential requirements that manufacturers need to demonstrate compliance with. Okay, so the essential requirements we're talking now about four main essential requirements. The first one, 3.1a, is related to the health and safety of the users and animals. Okay. The 3.1b is related to the adequate level of electromagnetic compatibility. The 3.2, and the most relevant, is related to radio. It's related to the inefficient use of radio spectrum in order to avoid harmful interference. And the new essential requirements that they are enforced and active since August this year, so meaning less than 2 months, okay, are the cybersecurity requirements. The new 3.3 cybersecurity requirements, we are talking about 3 new essential requirements. 3.3D relates to the protection of the network. 3.3E, protection of personal data and privacy. And the 3.3F, protection from fraud. Okay, these are the new essential requirements of the Radio Equipment Directive that beginning August 2025, manufacturer for radio internet connected manufacturer and radio connected products, placing product in Europe, they need to demonstrate compliance. Next one. So, as I explained before, the Radio Equipment Directive came into effect in June 2017, but the Commission delegated 30 of October 2021 applies internet new cybersecurity essential requirements to internet connected radio equipment. Okay? So it's forth from beginning of August 2020. So a little bit more details about each new essential requirements. The 3.3D radio equipment doesn't have the network which is functioning, not use network resources, thereby causing an unacceptable degradation of service is the first one, 3.3D. The 3.3E, radio equipment incorporates safeguards to ensure that the personal data and privacy of the user and the subscribers are protected. Okay. And the 3.3F, radio equipment supports certain features, ensuring protection from fraud. Okay. Later on, we will explain how manufacturers can apply which technical solutions they can apply to demonstrate compliance to these new essentials requirements related to cybersecurity. Next one, please. So this new delegated act, as I said, now in force, is also excluding certain products, okay? Certain product types are excluded from the scope of the delegated act. For example, and the most relevant one, the 3.3D, E, and F do not apply to medical and IVD medical devices or devices under the MDR and the IVDR regulations. The reasons are simple. The European Commission considered that these two regulations, MDR and IVDR, already have mechanisms to prove or demonstrate cybersecurity compliance or cybersecurity mechanisms to avoid unuseful and different not good mechanisms. The 3.3 and F do not apply to civil aviation equipment, automotive equipment, and electronic road toll systems. Okay, we are explaining this to give you a full picture what products are in scope, what products can out excluded from the scope. In addition, and as a final comment, the 3.3 FE of the RED applies to wearable radio equipment, toys, which are also radio equipment, and radio equipment for childcare, whether this is internet connected or not. This is for the second essential requirement related to security. It shall avoid any hazard related to remote communication, observation and control of the child, unauthorized communication or interaction. Okay, next one, please. So let's talk now about practical examples. What product may require RED testing or RED certification or according to these new cybersecurity requirements? So basically, you can imagine the broad range of products considered now with this boom of IoT. Whatever product now is also connected to internet, okay? We have Wi-Fi or cellular connectivity and so on. We are talking about consumer, obviously, smartphone, tablets, smartwatches, fitness trackers, wearables, wireless headsets, and portable mobile devices directly or indirectly connected to internet. IoT and smart devices, smart home, connected appliances, wearable health monitors, IoT-enabled industrial equipment, digital and connected fire equipment, payment and financial devices like wireless payment terminals, smart card readers, mobile point of sales product, entertainment and educational product, transportation, automotive and safety devices, including vehicle telematics, GPS trackers, fleet management devices, etc., communication and networking devices, Wi-Fi routers, access point, mesh network devices, EV chargers with internet connectivity. They are also under these new cybersecurity requirements. A smart EV charging station with network capabilities for remote monitoring and control. Okay, connected home and commercial EV chargers. What? Miscellaneous connected devices. Okay, we are repeating again, products that are accepted from the RED cybersecurity requirement, as I said, not connected radio equipment, or devices used only for military applications, or medical devices, as I explained in the previous slide. Okay, this slide is just giving you a full picture, whole picture, what kind of product may require cybersecurity testing and certification assessment. Next one. So let's talk a little bit more about the application of these essential requirements. So we have here in this presentation some three common cases, three common samples. Let's talk about the internet connectable home appliance that exchange status and control information with user app via Wi-Fi or internet, receive over-the-air software update. In this case, the 3.3D is this internet connected radio equipment. Yes, it connects via another equipment to the internet. It's very important. The regulations of the new delegated act said that products in the scope are connected directly or indirectly to the internet. In this case, we are talking now about the applicability of the requirement 3.3D. Next one. The Bluetooth headset. This is the second example. This product sends and receives and control data to or from a Bluetooth host device. This software update capability cannot be controlled from the internet. In this case, the 3.3E will apply. Does it process personal or privacy data? Yes, it's worn on the body and process personal data, voice data. Okay. Next example and the last one. A public EV charger. A public EV charger sends and receives control and measurement data to a remote server. The user can make card payment. In this case, the three requirements will apply. The 3.3D, is this internet connected radio equipment? Yes, it connects to a remote server to send and receive data. So the 3.3D applies. The 3.3E, does it process personal or privacy data? Yes, some information used in the handling of payment can be considered personal data, simple payment card details. And the 3.3E, does it enable financial transaction? Yes, because in this case, the card payments are financed, well, in this case, in this product, and this product is a low income making card payment, are financial transactions. Okay, next one. So why is so important this new radio equipment? Why they are so important, this new radio equipment directed cybersecurity? It basically is a new legislation, it's a regulation, so make it at the beginning of August, all radio equipment covered by this essential requirement must comply in order to be placed in the European market. The product currently being placed on the market, we need to comply if they will continue to be placed on the market after this date. Okay, so this is a very important note. And compliance with this applicable essential requirement will be required to obtain and to bear the CE mark. So there is a very another regulation related to cybersecurity, specifically in the UK market. Okay. Some products are placed on the UK market using CE market. This will apply to this product too, okay? But very important comment, the radio equipment directed compliance does not replace the PSTI. The PSTI regulation in force from last year requires obviously compliance to specific cybersecurity requirements, but they are different from the ones in the radio equipment directive. Okay, so important, as I said, the radio equipment directed compliance does not replace the PSTI. Next one. Has your organization, this is a poll, I guess. Is this a poll? Has your organization started preparing for compliance with the new? Exactly, thank you. I cannot see the results, okay? But what this is a very important question, as you can imagine. So if you or your company has start preparing for compliance with the new, yes, I can see now 50% of the audience said no, and obviously 43% said yes. Okay, thank you so much for everyone for participating. Next slide, please. So let's talk about now how to comply. So you have in your product on your product roadmap, or you have already obviously preparing for the compliance activity for your product, how you can comply. So there are essentially three ways, three potential options in the radio equipment directive. Okay, when we are assessing the compliance of radio equipment with the essential requirement, applying harmonized standards. Harmonized standards, they are obviously published in the OGU and they are harmonized standard. In that case, next slide, please. You can use or a module A, that is the declaration of conformity, or C and module H. In the case that when assessing the compliance of radio equipment directive with essential requirements, the manufacturer has not applied harmonized standard, has applied only in part harmonized standard, or where harmonized standard do not exist, only these procedures may be used. Module B plus C or Module H. Basically, it's required the involvement of a notified body. So as a summary, manufacturers, they have options, they have the possibility of applying harmonized standard or not. If they are applying harmonized standard in full, they can go for Module A, a declaration of conformity or subset declaration, or using a notified body. In the other case, that the manufacturer does not apply the harmonized standard, has applied only in part harmonized standard, or where harmonized standard do not exist for any reason, or because they are very new or they are still not harmonized, manufacturers need to use, it's mandatory to use a notified body. That's the case, Module B plus C, the UTIC examination certificate, or the Module A is conformity based on a full quality assurance. Okay, next one. So, but for these new Radio Equipment Directive cybersecurity requirements, there are harmonized standards already. The European Commission asked CEN and CENELEC standard organization to develop harmonized standards. So, and we're talking here about 3 harmonized standards. The 18031/1 that covers the essential requirement 3.3D, part 2 that covers protection of personal data and privacy, and the part 3 that covers protection from fraud of 3.3F. These standards were published in August 2024, last year, and they were harmonized with certain restrictions that my colleague Mustani will explain later in January 2025. Mustani, my colleague, will provide a little bit more detail about the different mechanisms included in the 18031, but you can read the access control, authentication, secure updates, secure communication, secure storage, resilience, network monitoring, traffic control, user notification, confidential cryptographic keys, etc. So next one. So how BSI can help with RED compliance. So currently, our lab in the UK is accredited. This is the first and only UCAS accredited laboratory for 18031 for all the standards, all the part of the standard. We include obviously conceptual evaluation, the functional evaluation, the testing locations, and okay. And we are also accredited for the also very relevant consumer IoT product cybersecurity standard 303645. We are accredited for both. And also BSI is a notified body with number 2797, covering the new Radio Equipment Directive essential requirements for cybersecurity 3.3 DER, meaning that BSI is a partner, full partner, including the testing activities, assessment activities, and the notified body certification services if needed and requested by the client. Okay, next one. So how can I get ready for the RED? So this is extracted from the Blue Guide, European Commission. Okay, so the first activity is to review the product risk assessment. Okay, is manufacturer needs to understand it first if the product is in scope or not. Okay, and which essential requirements are applicable 3.3 D, E, and F. So the second step is to start applying technical solutions. A possible option is applying an harmonized standard 18031, part 1, part 2, part 3 to cover applicable essential requirements. If not, use a 16 IoT Pro cybersecurity standard like the 303645 or 62443/4/2, more focus on industrial. Okay, so and after that, to apply the conformity assessment procedure, product testing, and use a notified body or not. Okay, as explained before, if using harmonized standard, manufacturer can use or not a notified body, can involve or not a notified body, in case that the standards are not harmonized or the standard have been applied with certain restriction, a notified body needs to be involved. Okay, next one. So a risk assessment is expected that manufacturers will produce a documented risk assessment to determine the applicability of essential requirements. And the technical control is very important, the technical control to address those risks. So you can see intended use and foreseeable use, threat modeling, open testing, reliability testing, lead reach to an identification of grading of risk, okay? After that, selection and implementation of controls, and as a late result, analysis of acceptance, justification of residual risk. There is not a specific standard or methodology required by the IDD, but we have mentioned here a technical report, HCTR 103935, that can be a useful reference document for all of you. Okay, just to obviously it's a useful reference document to develop a documented risk assessment for your products. Next one. And now I will leave to Mustari to continue. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carlos. And hello, everyone. So what I will do for the next 10, maximum 15 minutes is try to explain or introduce you to the EN 18031 standards that Carlos has previously mentioned as the harmonized standards for compliance with the 3 new essential requirements introduced in the RED last month. So we'll begin by talking about the EN 18031 standards in general and their general structure. So there are 3 standards, one aligned for each essential requirement, and they are all structurally similar. They are very similar standards, each actually sharing many of the same requirements or topics. As you can see on the screen, there is a lot of crossover. EN 18031 Part 1, for example, that relates to protection of the network, is the arguably shortest of the standards, with only 33 requirements spread across not all of the topics or mechanisms. 18031-2, related to personal data and privacy, is a longer standard with more requirements. But you can see there are some areas from the Part 1 that are not covered in the Part 2, and so it is with the Part 3 as well. So what you will find is that if your product needs to comply with 1, 2, or even all 3 of the essential requirements, you may be applying multiple parts of EN 18031 in parallel. The good news is that there is a common structure between the standards and there is a lot of commonality in the topics, though I must stress that when the same topic appears in multiple standards, it is not necessarily identical. For example, the topic of authentication mechanisms, whereas that appears in all 3 standards, in the Part 2 and the Part 3, the concept of two-factor or multi-factor authentication is introduced. The Part 1 standard only discusses single-factor authentication. So moving on, how do we actually read or understand these standards? And the first thing to understand with them is that they're not just sets of requirements and test methods, but they introduce a requirement on manufacturers to understand and document their security of their product. And this is done by understanding assets. So assets are information, data, or functions that need to be protected. It's very loosely defined what constitutes an asset. However, the standard requires most of the assessments to be done with respect to the assets that are potentially affected and the assets that are protected and controlled by each security mechanism. So each standard deals with a different type of asset. So 18031 Part 1 is mainly concerned with network assets. That is those data, functions, parameters related to use of the network, whereas 18032 is related to privacy assets, which is your personal data and confidential data. And finally, 18031 Part 3 is related to financial assets. So that's data and information and functions related to basically money and transactions. All three standards talk about security assets. Security assets, again, are functions and data and settings, parameters, configuration settings that can have an effect on the security of the related network privacy or financial assets, depending on which part of the standard we are talking about. It's very important to understand the assets. I cannot stress that enough. If you are undertaking an assessment against EN 18031, I would advise that the starting point is always to understand and document what assets are in the device. If you, for example, have implemented a access control mechanism, so you are limiting the access of users, whether they're authorized or unauthorized, to a certain function, then you have to understand, well, why are we doing that? What does this function do? What assets are exposed? And map clearly which assets relate to that control mechanism. Likewise with encrypted communications or encrypted storage, understanding what assets are being protected by these mechanisms that you have implemented in your device is the key to going through an 18031 assessment. So how do you actually read and use 18031? The standard, if you look at it, is very text heavy. It's a very long standard with a lot of text in it. The good news is that it does follow a consistent and reasonably logical structure, with every single clause in the main body of the standard structured in the same way. So as an example here, I'm showing the clause which is tagged with authentication mechanism 5, which is about password strength. And the document does use a lot of tags, which is to enable or make easier the use of machine reading tools to digest the standard and potentially simplify it. So every requirement is tagged. In this case, AUM authentication mechanism 5 is related to password strength. And within it, there is a requirement. So every requirement is tagged, and there is a clear statement of what the requirement is. The standard also provides rationale and guidance for each requirement. These are useful background notes that help you understand the context and how the requirement may be applied. And then we get to the assessment criteria itself. So how do we actually assess compliance with this requirement? And for each assessment criteria, there is a statement of the assessment objective. So what is the goal of this assessment? Usually, the goal is to determine compliance with the requirement. Then you have what's called implementation categories. Now, implementation categories are common options for how to actually comply with the particular requirement. In this case, the requirement is that passwords shall be unique per product. So the two implementation categories given are to either implement a unique password, which is in the device, and is the uniqueness is determined by following best practice down to how the password is generated. Or the other option is to enforce setting the password on first use. So when the device is first configured, the user has to set their own password. And by the user setting their own password, you assure some degree of uniqueness because that password is unique to the user. So each of these two options is also given a tag, and a machine readable tag that makes it, again, easy to find parameters and options throughout the standard. And this leads to the final part of each requirement, which is the required information. The 18031 standards, as I have previously mentioned, is very dependent on the manufacturer providing information about the product, everything about the assets, how they are protected, the selected pathway through the standard, the rationale for how a requirement is met must all be documented, and each requirement has its specific information requirement that must be provided to whoever is evaluating compliance with the standard. So looking at the required information part in this case, in this clause, there are 4 pieces of information that are required. The description of the authentication mechanism using a password, how the password complies with the requirement, which implementation category is used, and then decision tree. So there's a description of a path through a decision tree and justification of a path through a decision tree. So what do I mean by decision tree? Each clause, each requirement of the standard comes with a decision tree that guides you through, for each mechanism and asset that's being discussed in this requirement, a pathway to determine, does it comply or not, or is the requirement actually applicable? This is covered in what's called the conceptual assessment. So the third party will review the required information that was provided and the declared pathways through the decision tree to understand, does the required information and rationale actually make sense? Do we have a theoretical compliance with the standard by reviewing the information? Following the conceptual assessment, then you have what's called functional assessments. And you have 2, functional completeness and functional sufficiency. So the first requirement is functional completeness. So a third-party laboratory, such as BSIs, would review physically a sample of the device under test and check that in practice, is the information that was provided complete? So for example, under AUM 5 for password strength, as a manufacturer, you will have declared all of the password-based authentication mechanisms in the device. The completeness test is then to inspect and search through the device and look for password-based authentication mechanisms that were not declared. And if our lab did not find any, then we can assume that the information is complete and therefore the requirement is passed. If we find something that was not declared, then we need to revisit the conceptual assessment by redeclaring and understanding, does that actually comply? Once we know that the information is complete, or are we confident that the information is complete, then we can do functional sufficiency. So is the implementation that is described in the documentation actually true for the sample under test? So that is our sufficiency. Is it true, and does the implementation actually work as described? These functional tests are done on physical samples, as I say. So the story with 18031 is not a simple one. So while up until this point, we have been discussing these standards as harmonized standards, in truth, there are certain conditions where they are not able to act as harmonized standards. They have been harmonized with restrictions. The first restriction, which applies to all of the standards, really, all 3 parts, is that the sections named rationale and guidance do not prefer or confer presumption of conformity. So there's a requirement to apply the standard, each requirement, and the assessment methodology and criteria, but you cannot rely on the rationale or guidance as means of conforming with the essential requirements. So the rationale and guidance are purely there to provide guidance, but cannot be relied on as normative text. The main restriction on EN 18031 part 1, 2, and 3, but mainly part 1, is that when it comes to the clauses on password strength, the standard permits the user to change their password. And in being able to change their password, they may actually set no password. And the restriction is clear that if the user is able to set the password as nothing and therefore not use a password, where we've already decided and agreed that the device implements a password-based authentication mechanism to protect access or tampering with assets, then the product may comply with the standard, but does not meet the requirement of the RED. So just to be clear, the use of passwords where the user can change it to no password will not benefit from presumption of conformity. The standard is not harmonized in that case. This applies across all three parts. For the Part 2 standard related to privacy and protection of personal data, there are specific restrictions around the use of the standard for toys and childcare equipment. Essentially, where the parental or guardian access control is not ensured in the application of these requirements, then again, the standard does not provide presumption of conformity. It is possible to comply with this standard for example, for a toy or a childcare equipment, and to provide access control mechanisms that limit access to certain classes of authorized user. But if specifically the parental or guardian access control is not ensured, and the ability of parents and guardians to limit access of, for example, children to external things, or indeed external services, providers, people, users, access to the child, if that parental and guardian access control is not assured, again, the standard does not provide presumption of conformity. Finally, in EN 18031-3, related to financial transactions, this particular requirement of 18031 does not provide presumption of conformity. It's around software update mechanisms. So where a software update is provided to a device, the requirement is that the update mechanism shall only install software whose integrity and authenticity are valid at the time of installation. So we have to be sure that we're installing the right software update, it came from the right place, and it has not been tampered with. The standard provides 4 solutions, 4 implementation categories, and the restriction states that none of these methods alone are considered sufficient for the treatment of financial assets. Therefore, if you have a product that is in scope of 18031-3 and to which this requirement applies because it receives software updates, then the implementation categories, the assessment criteria given in the standard, does not confer presumption of conformity. In the case of all 3 of these restrictions, if the restriction is applicable, that is, users can set no password, or it is a toy or childcare equipment that does not provide or ensure parental access control, or it is a financial equipment that has software update functionality, you will not benefit from presumption of conformity and will need to use a notified body. So next steps. As a manufacturer, you need to identify which RED essential requirements apply to your products. This has always been the case, as Carlos has introduced earlier, but specifically for the cybersecurity requirements, different products will be affected by different essential requirements. It's important to understand which ones are in scope for your product, and then to decide which standards apply. How are you going to demonstrate conformity with these essential requirements and access these standards? Review them, understand them, check the product against the requirements, and prepare the required information. Especially if we're talking about EN 18031, the information requirement is heavy and essential for a third party or anyone to evaluate compliance with the standard. And then have your product assessed, and if necessary, apply to a notified body. So a couple of common questions that come up related to the standards and the RED in general. So the first one is around applying these requirements to products that are already in the field. So rightly, the RED and the standards talk about topics such as secure updates and therefore providing software updates to products, and that can affect products in the field. Products in the field have been receiving software updates for a long time. So do these requirements apply retrospectively to things already in the field? And the simple answer is no. The RED, any CE marking regulation or directive, applies to a product at the point that that item is placed on the market. So anything already on the market is fundamentally out of scope. Another question that commonly comes up is around the use of equipment that will be used with legacy systems, especially in the industrial control and large commercial settings. There may be a requirement to interact with legacy systems that may use older or deprecated communication methods or encryption methods, but you need that interoperability. And so the question is, are these products that are intended for that use with legacy systems, exempt from the requirements? And the simple answer is no. The requirements will apply to any in-scope equipment, although I will point out that the EN 18031 standards provide many ways of meeting their requirements and are not specific or do not require any specific solutions to any of the requirements. And it is possible. It is possible to apply 18031 and for that to take into account legacy compatibility needs. The next one is radio equipment is configured through a mobile phone app. Does the app also need to be tested and to comply with the RED? And again, the answer here is no. The RED applies to radio equipment, equipment being a device that sends or receives radio waves for the purpose of communication or radiolocation. So mobile phone apps and software are actually not in scope of the Radio Equipment Directive, although fast forward 2 years, there is another piece of legislation coming, the EU Cyber Resilience Act, that will bring these devices, these supporting companion apps and software products into scope. But right now, the focus is on the radio equipment itself, the physical device. And finally, if you have products that are tested the 18031 standards and they are not affected by the restrictions, can you still use a notified body? And the answer is, of course you can. Yes, the use of a notified body is available to you, whether it is mandatory or optional. And there are many reasons you may choose to use a notified body. Okay, that ends the FAQs. So I will hand back to Faizan or Kiran, sorry, who will put one last question on the screen and then go through your questions in the chat if there are any.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Mustanir. That was an amazing session. So as Mustanir mentioned, we've got one more poll question. Would you like a one-on-one call about R&D testing or certification activities for your products? Please let us know. It will be shutting the poll. So perfect. So we've got 4 responses, all saying yes. So thank you. We will take that into consideration and reach out. The team will reach out. There are a few questions. Sorry, just before I go on to that, again, the toolkit. So if anyone didn't scan it earlier, please feel free to scan the QR code, which will give you the free toolkit. All right, and now I will move on to Q&A. There are a few questions, so just going to throw it out there, and then Mustanir or Carlos, you can pick it up. So the first one is, how many clauses can be integrated with cybersecurity and business security standards? I'm not sure if you want to expand on that or if you got the context of that, Mustanir, Carlos.
Maybe
I'll be honest, I'm not clear what the question means. What I will say, however, is that the 18031 standards or other product cybersecurity standards are quite independent in their application and requirements from general business security standards. So, for example, you may be implementing something like ISO 27001 for your business information management management information security. That has zero crossover with 18031, for example. The 18031 standards and other product standards are particularly focused on the product, the device itself, and don't affect general business management requirements, and vice versa. So ISO 27001, for example, will not discuss, for example, the particular security requirements for products that are manufactured and placed on the market.
Yeah, thanks, Mustamir. I would have taken that same context of maybe ISO 27001 to just see the clauses integrated into that. So hopefully, Zain, we've answered that question. If you want to elaborate, feel free to just type it in there. Another 3 questions from Uttam. So as a safety requirement, which standards are applicable and covered under the RED?
You mean if the question is related to potential standard to be used to demonstrate compliance with the 3.1A safety requirement, usually for IT equipment or AV equipment, is used the 62668. 62668, that is the new one successor of the 6950. Okay, this is the one of the main standard. It can be many, depending on the product. One of the standards can be used to demonstrate compliance with the 3.1A safety requirements in the RED directive. Okay, these obviously are the legacy requirements. Okay, in this webinar we are focusing on the cybersecurity, okay, requirements and how to comply with these new cybersecurity requirements via the use of a harmonized standard like the 18031.
I would just elaborate, thank you, Carlos, on that. So as I said, the focus of this webinar is the new cybersecurity requirements, but speaking very generally for the wider radio equipment directive, the place to look for standards is the harmonized standard lists. So as mentioned earlier, 3.1A is aligned with the low voltage directive. So if you look at the harmonized standard list published for the low voltage directive, you will find many standards that may be applicable to cover safety. Similarly, with the EMC directive, the harmonized standard list will provide clues as to standards that are applied, and same for 3.2 in particular. There is the harmonized standard list for the RED. As a note, in terms of the other part of the question, which other directives apply, CE marking in general is quite modular. So the meaning of a CE mark is a declaration from a manufacturer that all applicable regulations have been complied with, and this is stated on the declaration of conformity. So yes, multiple directives can apply to a product. It really depends on the specific product, hence the requirement for a risk assessment to determine which directives are applied, which essential requirements apply. Just as a note that generally speaking, when you have applied the RED and declared conformity to the RED, the Radio Equipment Directive, there is not a need to separately declare conformity to the Low Voltage Directive or the EMC directives. That only covers that. In terms of Roche, for example, or if you have a sector-specific directive, for example, it is a piece of PPE equipment, the PPE regulation will apply as well. So that it fundamentally it's building blocks, apply all of the regulations and directives that potentially apply to the standard or to the product.
Excellent. Thanks, Mustamir. And probably the last question before we finish up is the validity of the RED certification. So I think, Carlos, the discussion earlier, how long is the certificate valid for? And what would you recommend if there are changes in products? So
well, Mustamir will elaborate after my speech, but basically a new tech and the European type certificate are notified body as per opinion. It does not have an expiration date, okay? But there's a requirement that the manufacturer needs to inform or shall to inform the notified body in case of any hardware or software changes impacting the compliance to the requirements, okay? but the notified body will not have an expiration date as itself. Understand?
Not much more to add than that, just to sort of again highlight that the certificate will apply to only the specific devices that are tested or certified at the point of evaluation. There's no ongoing activity or maintenance activity on the certificates. So if the real world product design drifts from what is certified, i.e. you make changes to the device specification in terms of the hardware specification or the software specification, and therefore the product does not match what has been certified, then there is potential for your declaration of conformity to become invalid should this be questioned by market surveillance authorities in Europe. So it is important to be updating your notified body as and when you make changes to your product specification to ensure that your certification is up to date with the product as you are placing it on the market.
Excellent. All right, so that concludes the webinar. So again, thank you, Carlos and Mustamir, for insightful information. If anyone has any questions further to this, please put that in the chat and we will try and get back to you. As mentioned earlier, we will share the slides and the recording to everyone. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.